Welcome to this podcast is making me thirsty, the number one destination for Seinfeld fans. This episode 78. Today's guest is a comedian and writer who has worked with Paul Reiser and comedy legend Gary Shandling. He's the author of Sleeping with Your Gynecologist. He wrote the one-man show Side Effects May Include, about his experience dealing with his wife's Parkinson's diagnosis. And of course, he was an original writer on Seinfeld. Please welcome Marc Jaffe. Marc, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, boy. And that applause is just deafening.
Well, this is a treat, Marc. So take us back. You joined Seinfeld in 1990.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Right?
I want to make sure what was behind me before I take you back.
So how did it all come about? I know you had a relationship with Reiser, and then how did you meet Jerry and get onto the show?
Boy, I met, I don't know when I originally met Jerry. Probably it was years before I started writing on the show, but just it was one of those hanging out in clubs and saying hello, and maybe one time being on the same show. I don't even remember. But then, I started writing for Paul, and shortly after that, Jerry, the Seinfeld Chronicles came on, the 4 episodes. And I thought, oh man, this is up my alley. I would love to do something like this. But I was living in Cleveland, and Jerry ended up doing some stand-up gigs between the end of that 4-session season and the next season. And one of his places was Cleveland. He came to Hilarities here in town. So I went down to see him and reintroduced myself after the show and said, I'd love to submit some stuff, just on the chance that he was looking for somebody. And he said, well, actually, we are looking for someone. And so I sat down and wrote like 6 pages of stand-up just to hand to him, and mailed it into him. And then like 2 days later, I got a call, and he goes, I love it. You're on board. So
That's
it
awesome.
was, I was pretty amazed, but really thrilled. And, my life would take a nice turn for the better. And Jerry was always good. I saw, especially in the beginning time there, he was giving young guys opportunities, guys that he didn't necessarily know, but just would look at their work. And it was just I think I was able to hit his voice pretty well, and so that's what did it. So I went out and was there for the first season.
And so as a writer on that first group there, was it seems to us, from what I've gathered, is it's really you're pitching ideas to Larry and Jerry, and if they like it, then you kind of run with it. The Limo is one of our favorite episodes of all time. It's in our top 5, and I know you're credited with it. Yeah, for sure. It's incredible. Curious, take us through how, was that the first one that kind of got through, or was there any before that where you kind of were given your pitches and things kind of made their way on screen that were coming off your brain?
Well, so I mean, I went out there, and my specific job, the reason Jerry hired me was he was thinking to himself at the time, they were doing the stand-up interstitials between the beginning, the end, and even sometimes a couple times in the middle was the idea, because it had the whole conceit that it was him, where his material came from. So you kind of had to show the material. So I was hired to write the stand-up. That was specifically my job. And Jerry thought, oh man, I'm just going to be overwhelmed between the acting and the writing, all the stuff, and I'm not going to have any time to do the stand up. So that's what I went there for. And that was, while I was out there that first season, that was my full responsibility. And I didn't really pitch show ideas. Basically, I would just get the shows once they were written and comb through them to try to figure out stand-up bits that we could do.
Okay, so that's how they always matched the show back then, like you said, and even in the middle they would match the show. So you had the whole script, and would then be like, okay, what bit can I write off of the script?
Yeah. So I would just write pages and pages of stuff, and then Jerry and I would go hit the clubs every night. We'd go to the Improv, go to the Comedy Store, wherever it was, and he'd try the things that between he and I that we'd written together, or that I written, or whatever appealed to him, or whatever he thought was good, he'd go and edit it down and
Oh, wow.
rewrite it on his own, and we'd hang out, and I would take notes during the shows, and he was always in the morning. I'd make sure I would always get there early, and I'd have my little tape recorder, and I'd make notes and changes on where this worked or where it didn't, or here's a good change of this line or something, and I called it notes on a show, and I'd just give him a page when he showed up in the morning. He said that was his favorite thing, and he was getting notes on the show. So that's how we'd work them, and then it was like every once a month, every 6 weeks or something like that, we would tape all the stand up.
Okay.
For all the shows together, and we'd bring in make the set into a club and bring in a bunch of extras to be audience, which I always thought, man, that's what a good extra job.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So he would do all of the sets at once. So the audience in that club, that made up club, had no idea where it fit into the actual show, the
Right.
episode. Oh, interesting.
Right.
So he just like run the whole thing as if it was
Yeah.
a full set in front of people.
Yeah, I mean, well, because obviously the stand-up had to stand on its own anyway.
Yeah,
Because
I guess in a way it did. Yeah, I never thought
if
about it.
he is going to be in a club performing it, obviously it's going to be a setup, so you can get away with Sometimes you might have to. Sometimes I can't remember really if it was edited enough that you didn't need the setups. But he would do the setups for the audience because he wanted it to be like a stand-up, regular stand-up show. So yeah, and then those kind of over time got faded out, and then so the Limo, I just, I was I was pitching just pages and pages of stuff, and every now and then,
So yeah,
something
what
would
you
hit.
how did you pitch that, Mark? Did you have a full script, or was it more of a concept? I know Larry Charles and Larry David kind of stepped in and I guess helped write it. But yeah, tell us a little bit of how that process went. I mean, to us, the Limo, it's such a unique episode. I mean, it's two guys, quite frankly, acting like children. It's just like pure joy from like getting away with something, and then like reacting to hearing about
Having it come back,
Yeah.
yeah.
The
yeah,
jig is
That's
up. It was
kind
a
of
bad jig.
it's pure magic.
I was I pitched. I think I pitched it fairly early on. Just this idea of going and saying, "Hey, I'm O'Brien," or whatever name it was, because that's something I always wanted to do. I'd come in,
Yeah.
the three guys with the signs in the airport, and I want to go, "Hey, it's me," because how do they have any idea who it is?
Right.
And so basically, that was what I pitched, was going up to the limo driver at the airport and stealing a limo, because you just say who you are. And then the question became, okay, well, that's a great idea. It's a great premise for a show. Who's it going to be? I mean, because something has to happen because of it. How do they get their comeuppance and all that? So it went around. Like Larry Charles came up with the idea of it being a neo-Nazi guy pretty early on, but everyone was like a little squeamish about it and whether it would work or not. And then
Right.
it went around for like a month or 6 weeks or something, and people would come out with, "Oh, how about this? How about that?" And nothing ever made as much sense as that. And so finally we said, you know what? Let's write it. And Larry, took pen to paper and came up with a great show. And so it was perfect.
So that
And
so that
actually, I'll tell you the funny story about the whole thing. I mean,
Yeah.
funny in itself, but so it was 2004, the presidential election, Kerry and Bush, John Kerry and George Bush running for re-election, and it was a really tight race. And as at least it used to when we were a normal state. It often came down to Ohio and Cleveland, because it depends how strong the vote is in Cleveland determines what is going to happen in Ohio. So Larry was very involved in the campaign, in the Kerry campaign, and he was coming, and I was involved in the Kerry campaign here, and Larry was coming to Cleveland so I got word through the Kerry campaign. They said, "Oh, Larry David's coming to Cleveland. We need someone to pick him up at the airport." And I was like, I'll pick him up. I mean, I haven't seen Larry in a few years. So he was flying into, I had to go get I couldn't use my car because I had a Toyota or Honda or something. And he had to use an American car. It was this stupid thing. But so I had to borrow somebody's American car. And I went to pick him up at there's the smaller downtown airport, not the main airport, and he was coming in. So I get there, and I couldn't resist. I held up a sign, "O'Brien," and I waited and Larry gets off the private plane, and he walks down, and he sees the O'Brien sign, and he chuckled for a second, and he didn't realize it was me. I had grown a beard in the interim, and he hadn't seen me in the beard, and then he does a double take. He goes, "Mark." Yeah, but it was like life imitating art, imitating life, or I don't know what.
That's a fantastic story. I mean,
Love
yeah,
it.
that episode, and you mentioned it. It took,
And then I'll tell you the great thing for me was the rest of that night. Of course, Kerry spoke, but the cool thing was Springsteen was there performing, and and so Larry and I go to once Larry realized it was me, he said, "Oh, come on and hang out, and we'll do whatever." So we're getting something to eat in the hotel, and he gets a phone call, and it's Springsteen. And Springsteen is going, I'm behind the security lines, and I all I want is a cheeseburger. Can you bring me a cheeseburger? And Larry's like, "Yeah, we'll get a cheeseburger." So we get Springsteen's, we get these cheeseburgers, and then we got to get past security, and security's going, "We're bringing Bruce's cheeseburgers." And I get to walk back, and I get to meet Bruce in his trailer, and oh man, it was cool. Good hanging out with Larry at the time.
wow, Larry and Bruce in 2004. That must have been something.
Yeah.
That reminds me of the old story with Mark McGuire. It just ties into the Yankees and Larry David. And when he was having his home run chase, they come in and said, "The boss is here to see you," meaning George
Right.
Steinbrenner. And then McGuire turns and says, "Springsteen?" So kind of interesting. But so the limo, you said it took about over a month to kind of curate and put that together. Was that common in those earlier days? Was there more time to kind of work on things?
No, I mean, not necessarily. Yeah, once there was an idea, once there was an idea, it was followed through. The problem was coming up with the ideas, until you had an actual show, some beats or some idea of where it was going, then you can do it. So mostly that was just in coming up. We got this little nugget of something that can be a show, but is it really? So that's why that one took a while. But usually once you come up with an idea and Larry likes it, you go, "Okay, let's do it." Like, so then another one that I did was the pick.
Yeah. Classic.
And that was that went too fast. I was a little disappointed because I came up with the idea for the nipple on the Christmas card.
The nip, yes.
And, yeah, I mean, but
how'd you come up with that?
Well, I could probably show you the picture. I don't think I can show you the picture, but my brother-in-law, my wife's brother, was taking Christmas morning pictures, and he took one picture that he sent out to the whole family, because it's a nice picture of him and his 1-year-old daughter, and in front of the fireplace, and he's in his robe, and he didn't notice, but his robe is open and he's hanging out. The stocking is hung, uh, and he sent this to, he's got 4 sisters and his mother, and none of them immediately noticed until my wife looked at it and was like, "Oh my God, Scott!" Uh, so so I pitched that. Again, it was a little bit of trying to figure out, like, is it gonna it was going to be too much if it was Jerry in that kind of situation
Right.
for network television, and so changing it to Elaine and her nipple. But so Larry said, he immediately wanted it, and he said, write up an outline of the episode, and I wrote it up and sent it to him the next day. I remember I was in a stand-up gig in Canada. Okay, I'll get this to you as soon as I can, and I got it to him the next day, or the day after, and he called me and said, "Well, it's a Christmas show, and we're too tight on time, and I don't have time for you to write the whole episode and then for me to rewrite it and everything. I'm just taking it over." So, I mean, that one went too fast. If it had been a regular show, then I could have been able to get the full writing credit rather than just a story credit. So yeah, that was that one.
Was that commonplace where Larry sort of would make that decision, like if the writer was going to run with it or if he was going to run with it, or just because there was time restraints on that one?
Yeah, I think it was just. I mean, I wasn't on the staff at the time. I was freelancing, so. But I think for the most part, guys, you had time to write it. I mean, anybody who you see gets writing credit, then they at least did a first pass. I mean, for the most part, everybody. It wasn't just me. Everybody says Larry rewrote everything. So
Yeah.
is what I saw when I was there. So
Right.
And no one ever complained that their stuff wasn't as good as the first time when they wrote it.
Yeah, we have talked to a couple of writers, especially ones early on, like Matt Goldman
Yeah.
and Pat Hazel. And Matt Goldman told us a great story about Jerry meeting with an executive at NBC and how he kind of told him he was sticking to his vision. I was curious from your perspective, being there, so early on. What was your take on on the show and where it was going, and season 2, no one knew. I mean, we were huge fans in season 2 watching it live, but it wasn't the hit that it became. Just being there early on, what did you kind of take from working, in that atmosphere with Jerry and Larry and everyone else?
Well, I mean, a couple. I guess you could take it from that they had their vision, which I think they kind of did. They had their vision of how they would like it, like not necessarily exactly what the show was going to look like, but that they wanted a show where they had autonomy and all that. I'm sure that stuff they wanted. So there was certainly, I remember the tapings and then having the meetings or the table reads and having the meetings afterwards in the office. And I remember one time I ineptly tried to stick up for a point that Larry was making, and I didn't do it real well. Larry got all pissed at me for doing something, which is Larry is the best person to have yell at you. I told him once he's like yelling at me, and I'm just laughing at him because his yelling is so funny. And I said, "You are the best yeller this side of Alan Arkin." I loved Alan Arkin, but yeah, Larry would he'd go nuts in some of those meetings, and they'd stand up for every little thing. They'd fight on so many different things for their what they wanted in a given episode. In terms of, I mean, they cared about the writing and the comedy, and that's what they wanted to stand out. So. They would always fight for that, and for the actors too. I think they would fight for them, and but it was a battle here and there, and it wasn't, and Larry didn't necessarily I mean, his vision was, I remember, I can't remember which episode it was, maybe the boyfriend or something, one of the ones earlier on when I was on staff, but it has what became a classic Seinfeld thing where it all tied to all the storylines would tie
Right.
together at the end. And this was like the first episode that it did that. And Larry was kind of both proud and amazed that it happened. I mean, he hadn't, I don't think he went in writing it knowing that was going to happen. And he said to me, I remember him saying that he goes, how'd you like that? That was pretty, I couldn't believe that we were able to do that. So, it was something new for him too. So
Yeah,
there
that's
was
the genesis.
learning all along.
That was the genesis of the whole show right there, you know?
Yeah, and Mark, you were there from the beginning. I mean, the season you were credited with, 91, the phone message, and the jacket we have in our top 10 episodes of all time.
Yeah, those are great.
I mean, it was such a foundation. I feel like those, believe it or not, are underrated as we move forward, and it kind of moves to Thursday night, the whole thing. I mean, we kind of look at it as two shows, right? Like kind of seasons 1 through 5, and then Sharonus leaves, and the show kind of takes on a different feel, different vibe, gets a little cartoonish. I'm just curious from being there at the beginning and then kind of watching it grow and change. We still think it's an unbelievable show, but how did you feel about that? And like, what was your take on kind of some of the later seasons? Although actually, you wrote your idea was on the bookstore, so and
Yeah.
curious about it as well.
Yeah, that was well. That was again kind of like the Limo, where I've always wanted to go. Hey, that's my. I always want, like, I'm in the bookstore. I got to use the restroom, so why don't I just take a book? And
so were
yeah,
you
so
sending? You were sending pitches to them even after, because between season 2 and season 9, that's a long span. Were you
Yeah.
always just trying to come up with ideas and just?
After Larry left the first time, I really slowed down, and it was really just, from like doing a couple hundred pitches a season, I probably would do like 10, if something that I go really hit me. And then, and then I didn't have a relationship with Spike Ferriston, who was on at the time. And, but I was like, this one's, it's too good.
Right.
So,
So during that time, you just mentioned hundreds of pitches where you were throwing out there during the earlier seasons. Yeah. How hard was it? I mean, I would, from what we've gathered, Larry, it's up to Larry if he likes it, and just watching some of your stand up and then hearing you talking now, you get the sense that you have the same sensibilities as both Larry and Jerry for sure. How difficult did you find it to sneak one past them where they liked it? I mean, it must have been, I don't know, just
yeah,
it's interesting.
Well, I'd say, look, I had, if let's say, I don't know, for example, I'm guessing probably did about, let's say 600 to 800 pitches over the course of the time, and 3 ended up as episodes. So that tells you that.
Yeah, that's incredible. What were some? Yeah.
And that's coming from somebody who, I remember Larry, actually it was we were talking at the, whatchamacallit, the Carrie, that night I was talking about with Springsteen, and Curb was, had started up, and I was like, oh, maybe are you looking for pitches for that? And he goes, yeah, send me things. You know what I like. So, somebody who hits 3. That's why I always laugh when people go, oh, I have an idea for Seinfeld. I'm like, yeah, it's
right.
I know, I'm in their heads better than 99% of the people out there, and I'm getting one on every 3 times.
Do you remember any that you thought, man, why did they not take this one? This would have been gold.
No, not off the top of my head. I mean, just some more recent ones. I had one. I haven't pitched this, but it was hysterical. And to me, would be like, you got to find the right situation. I've had, I think, 2 in the past 5 years that I bothered to send to Larry, but One was when I took I took a kimono. My wife has a kimono, Japanese kimono, and she took it in. I took it in for her to the dry cleaner, who was Korean, and the person starts railing on, "Oh, you think kimono is Japanese? It's not Japanese. Well, Koreans were the ones." Start going on that, but and then my daughter just told me, she goes, "This would be a good curb," and I said, "You're right, Sarah." My daughter was driving with her boyfriend's parents came to town. This is in Chicago, and she stopped at a light like a few back from the corner, and her hair, she got this long blonde hair. Her hair was caught in the window as she's driving, and the parents are in the back seat, and so she kind of rolls down the window to get her hair. As she stops, she rolls down the window to get her hair out, and she's going like this to get her hair off the window. And there's a homeless person on the corner who sees her doing like this and thinks she's waving to the homeless person who's hitting up cars for money to come over. and, and the homeless person starts coming over, and Sarah sees the person and rolls up her window. So, but you couldn't see the hair or anything. So the parents sitting in the back seat just assume Sarah's like, calls the homeless person over and then rolls the window up.
Shuts it on him.
Yeah. I thought that would be a thing for Larry. But whoever knows? It's just
Right.
if you hit something that makes Larry laugh, and it has to be, not only does it have to make Larry laugh, but the thing that always was undergirding, with everything I tried to do, was, he said, like, the limo is funny, or the nipple's funny, the bookstore, they're all funny because you can see them they're a funny premise that you're laughing at that idea in and of itself. It's not like, George goes to the dry cleaner and something happens that, whatever. It's boy, that's funny. And then we can really layer it and make it funny beyond that. So
Right. Yours was premise driven versus like character driven. Like, so
right.
when you thought about the limo, you didn't have a person in mind, but I mean, the pairing of Jerry and George, like Jason always talks about that. He loves the one-on-one moments with Jerry in the show. It really shines. So I guess, was that a common thread, like with Matt Goldman, Hazel, Larry Charles, like same kind of deal? Like they would pitch hundreds of ideas similar to what you did, and
well, I mean, Matt and Matt overlapped with me for a couple, just like a month or so. And then and Pat was, I mean, I knew Pat, but he wasn't really around when I was there, so I never saw those guys come in and pitch anything. That first season, I mean, don't forget, that was when we had plenty of time, because it was a mid-season replacement, and we were there like in September, and the first shows weren't going to be until, first airings weren't going to be till January, so it wasn't that time pressure of, okay, one's done, we got to get the next one up for next week. So Larry and Jerry, and Jerry was still on the scripts then. He had time to do that. So that was and then it even got delayed beyond that, because we were supposed to start the night of the Iraq War started, or
right.
the Desert Storm, whatever that was, Kuwait.
Did it bother you that they phased out the stand up?
No, I mean, I think the show had so much else going on at that point. And I mean, I wasn't, it wasn't my job anymore. And so it didn't really bother me. I think you were asking earlier about the first seasons versus the later ones, and I think that the volume of the stories took over, and there was so much. I mean, I look at them and I was like, or I'll read or look back at the first ones when I was there and go, boy, this does seem a little slow. And there's only, 2 stories instead of 4. But at the time, I mean, it was so different and so innovative. And I would get those scripts and I would just go, man, this is great. This is just so funny and so unlike anything else on TV that they're willing to do it. So it didn't seem slow in the moment.
Yeah, we're much bigger fans of those earlier seasons. The slowness of it, you could call it slow, and a lot of like you just said, but it's about Jerry and George, and just what it was like being that age at that time, and just the small
Right.
conversations and things, and then it just got too big and kind of crazy. But to each their own. A lot of people like those later seasons, but it wasn't as
Yeah.
much for us as the earlier ones. Um, I'm curious. Would be remiss if I didn't ask. I know your relationship with Gary Shandling was, he was a mentor of yours, and he's obviously a comedic legend and genius. What did you see? Aside from their kind of sensibilities, comedically, was there anything you took from, working with both Gary and Larry and Jerry? Those are three giants in the industry. I mean, what can you tell us sort of about, maybe what you kind of took from that?
Yeah, I mean, Gary was brilliant. He was great, and I was so lucky to just have the. He was like the first guy when I went out to LA. He was the first guy I ended up writing for, and and I learned so much. I mean, because we would get with Gary, we would talk comedy, and he would go, "Okay, this is why this works, or this is why this doesn't." With Jerry, I mean, I was by the time I got there, I was 10 years on and, or 8 years on, whatever, and knew a lot more. So I could converse with Jerry on a more equal basis to some degree. But still, I mean, with both of them, the level, the detail, use of the language and focus and, I think the big difference is that Gary was a character. I mean, he was himself, but that was a character. Jerry is, more traditional. I mean, you don't, you don't go, this is a Jerry Seinfeld persona. It's
Right.
Jerry's brilliant in seeing observational stuff and, making fun of the world around us. But Gary was always trying to find the truth in himself and how he always said, I have to be as close to who I am on stage as who I am in real life. The closer I can get to that, the funnier I'll be.
Oh wow.
And he always strived for that, and I mean, he hit it. I mean, you wouldn't know who Jerry is from his stand up, but Gary was Gary. So that was the difference. And yeah, he was so good.
Yeah, and I agree. And show is both of his shows were really
Yeah,
groundbreaking and just uniquely
right,
amazing.
right.
So,
Yeah.
Mark, just touching back to Seinfeld, you mentioned the process for the pick went really fast, but were you? I mean, end results. Were you happy with? It was your vision and your premise. Were you happy with both of those episodes? How they turned out? Was there things you thought you would have done differently that you recall? I thought that. I mean, they were
No.
incredible. I mean, you said it would have been tough using Jerry. I think Elaine, it was masterful how that they used
Yeah,
the knit
yeah,
in that.
yeah. No, I was. Hey, anytime you get a chance, and this has been throughout my career, but certainly anytime you get a chance to have Larry David write your ideas, go for it. And I say the same thing for all this stand up, for this, what I wrote for Jerry, for Paul, for Gary, for any of those guys, and any other people too. It's just everybody brings their own stuff to it, and if I can, if my premises and ideas and joke can get rewritten to, by them, man, I'm lucky and happy to have be participating in it.
Yeah, I mean, listen, your ideas have been making us laugh for years, and I think you're continuing that fight with Shaking with Laughter. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about kind of the cause and how your wife's doing, number one, and just how the overall battle on Parkinson's is going? We'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Well, thanks for asking. She's doing great. The pandemic was a little bit of a challenge, but because it's amazing how much exercise is important, and so it was just harder for her to. There was no place to go and get out, and she started this place called In Motion here, which is an unbelievable. We just had a fundraiser run walk, which we had over 1,000 people and raised like 400,000. So it
Nice.
was it was amazing. It's a unique center in the country because it's free to anybody with Parkinson's. So, but no, shake it. So that's In Motion. But Shaking with Laughter. Once she got diagnosed, we wanted to do something, to help out. But initially, it was a little hard because she was keeping it a secret because she was working as a OBGYN and also as a moil.
Really?
Yeah,
Oh wow.
a moil with Parkinson's.
Yeah, it's not.
Wow.
I don't even need to
That
write them.
sounds like a yeah, sounds like a Curb episode right there.
Yeah, yeah. So, but once she, came out and revealed it and eventually retired, she, we wanted, and I was like, well, I have all these connections and maybe some friends, so we can put on a show and raise some money. And I was thinking like, maybe we can raise like 20 grand or something. And we did our first show, and I had Wayne Cotter. Wayne. He used to host Comic Strip Live. I wrote on that show after I was on Seinfeld. Was writing on Comic Strip Live. Wayne
Oh
had
wow.
the George.
I used to tape Comic Strip Live.
George who's Jerry's manager, George
George
Shapiro.
Shapiro, yeah.
Shapiro and West. George and Howard Shapiro and West. They were also Wayne's management. So when I left Seinfeld, they said, "Oh, we got this guy who was great over at Seinfeld. You should pick him up." And so, yeah, Wayne, they hired me over there, and Wayne and I became friends. So Wayne came in, and Dave Coulier is an old friend.
Yep.
Joey on Full House, and yeah, there you go. Cut it out. So those two came in, were the stand-ups. If you're jazz fans at all, John Pizzarelli is a friend. Amazing guitarist, and he got his quartet together. So anyway, we did this one show, which I thought was going to be a one-time show, and we instead of raising 20 grand, we raised about 150, and Larry, and then we realized we had to do it again and again, and we did it for like 7 years, bringing in all different comedians and musicians and stuff, and one of the fun things for comedy wise was there was a online bidding thing called Charity Buzz, where it's like high end people would do things that are celebrity wise a lot of times, that are sports things, tickets, whatever, things that are hard to get, people would bid on. And so the best ask I did was for Larry. The first year, because Curb wasn't even going on, I don't think, at the time. But I said Larry would somehow, we came upon that he would do a pitch meeting. You could have a 20-minute pitch meeting with Larry on for anything you want, and people bid on this, and it went for like 18 grand. And I was
I
like,
thought it'd
wow.
be higher than that.
Well, but
I mean, that's a lot, but
yeah, it was. But when Curb wasn't going on and Seinfeld was, so
Okay.
it wasn't like you were pitching for a show or something.
right.
But then a couple other times, Larry did do, once Curb was going, he did. I remember the last year we did it. He did a walk-on part, like you could have a walk-on part. Not you wouldn't have a line, but you'll go on the set and meet Larry and try to get your walk-on part. And that went for 52 grand.
Oh, wow.
So
so
that
nice
was
to hear.
really, yeah, that was great. And, And Jerry gave tickets to one of the shows once, which went for like $5 grand. And then I had actually the one year I had, um, this was like before, I mean, this was like what Cameo, I should have come up with Cameo. That was the thing. But we did Tell a Joke for Parkinson's, and you could bid on any number of comedians telling you a joke. They would call you up and tell you a joke. Um, so I had everybody on the cast did it. Julia and Jason and Michael and actually Jerry didn't do that, but and Larry did it too. Larry did it, and Larry was the most. He went for like the highest. I don't remember what he went for, but he was the highest of all the comedians and everybody. And he was the most nervous about it. He was like, "I don't have a joke. I need a joke." He was calling the charity buzz people. How do I do it? I sent him like 4 of my favorite jokes. I just wrote them out and said, "Here, Larry, just pick one of these and call the person and tell them the joke."
Yeah, that's great. I mean, that's so great to hear. And Larry had that episode with Michael J. Fox on,
Yeah,
on Curb. So
on Curb.
that's a tie-in right there.
Well,
It's wonderful
that
to
was
hear.
actually at one point, I think I called him like right after they taped that, not knowing that it had taped. And Larry was like, I just had Michael J. Fox here. So of course I'll do it. So that was, that was a
Wow.
good.
That's so great to hear these stories. I mean, it's amazing that, the work you guys are doing. And we really thank you for joining us, Mark.
Whoops.
Your video. That's all right.
Yeah. Sorry. That was my,
That's all right.
phone.
Before we let you go, you did mention in there, about the cast helping you out, with the charity work. We didn't really get to talk too much about that, but just curious your take on, on working with the cast, Jason and Michael and Julia. Who you found writing for the better, or just kind of, what it was like kind of working on set with those guys, and girl. Just curious, what your overall take there was. I mean, we've heard so much about their professionalism and just how amazing they were. We obviously see it, but as someone who was there, we're just curious on your take.
Yeah, no, I mean it was a pleasure. It wasn't, I had no preconceived notions or anything. It was my first time on a show, and and I didn't have that much to do with them. I would, chat with them here and there, and Jason was always a great guy, and he was. I don't know if he made it out, but I'd always invite him to the comedian softball game. There was a famous comedian softball game on Mondays, when all the comedians were in town. So wanted to get him to that because he was a fan, and I mean, they've all been, very, very kind, but there was never any, sometimes they would come into the office and be complaining about, their particular episode, or wondering why they were not complaining, but, what's my role here? Why am I doing this? Or questioning something about that was going on. But that wasn't really, that was just me seeing it happen. I didn't have anything to do with it. That was just Jerry and Larry's stuff. So yeah, no, they were just very kind, nice people trying to figure it out. Everybody was just trying to figure it out.
Right. That's what I was going to say. It was early on where they didn't really have everything kind of locked completely in yet. There was definitely, a lot of it locking in, but it wasn't fully full speed ahead.
And everyone was like, so like if one episode Michael wasn't in much, he'd be like, "Oh, what'd I do? Am I okay? Relax. It'll work out."
Right.
I mean, I say that now, but I understand, at the time.
I'm glad Jason Alexander was playing some softball with you. And speaking of sports,
He plays center field. What we heard.
I'll leave you with this since you're in Cleveland, Mark. Favorite Cleveland athlete: Bernie Kosar, Brad Daugherty, or Carlos Baerga?
I got to choose amongst those 3.
Yeah, why not? Or throw in your favorite.
Well, I'm above and everything a baseball fan. So, and I love basketball too. But so I mean, LeBron is near and dear to my heart in every way. I used to go see him in high school, and what he did to bring us a champ. My one final league championship. I got one, and other than that, there's plenty of wonderful guys. I unfortunately now there's a little taint on Omar Vizquel, so that's because he was my daughter's favorite, so that he had a spot in my heart. But my favorite as a kid was Louis Tiant.
Nice.
You probably think of him as a Red Sox, but no, he was my favorite. 68, 1.12 ERA. Man, he had like, I don't know how many consecutive scoreless innings. Louis was the best, and he'd do that. He'd smoke a cigar while he was pitching, I think.
when they used to pitch,
they don't make him like they don't make him like that anymore.
Yeah. Louis was great.
Well, Marc, this was a blast, and keep fighting the fight, keep making us laugh, and we'll help it we can. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Marc.
Right.
This was so much fun.
Thanks so much, guys. Appreciate it. Keep up the good work.
Have a great day.
Bye.